Today, we had the semifinals happen for FNCS in nearly every single region, and yesterday was the Opens. Now, a lot of you may have not qualified for even the semis. Maybe you made it to the semis, but you weren't able to make it to the finals. Today, I'm going to be breaking down why you didn't qualify and how you can work on that for the weeks to come. Okay, so before I even start breaking down stuff, I just want to get into why you guys should actually listen to me. Now, I am not a pro player. I don't claim to be a pro player. This season, I haven't even hit Champion League because I haven't played Arena much, but don't click off the video because I have over 13 seasons of analytical analysis behind me as I have looked at the competitive meta and literally every season I've looked at how you can improve yourself. I've always been looking to try and further my game, and while my mechanics have never been there and I've never put in the time to actually get these mechanics better or make better macro decisions or just make better decisions in general, I know that some of you guys who are really dedicated to this can definitely make some of these plays and actually start placing better. So basically what I'm trying to say is I know what you need to do, I know where you need to improve, but I myself can't pull it off, but you guys, I totally think that all of you who are super dedicated definitely can. Okay, so let's start it off with people who didn't make it to the semifinals. This means you got knocked out in the first round. This means you didn't come in the top 1,000 trios in NA East or EU or respective to your region, depending on how many actually qualified. So we need to break down what went wrong, and for every single trio, it's a little bit different, so I'm going to be covering basically every major aspect. Let's start off with your macro decisions. Now, if you don't know, macro is basically how well you play the game in a mental state, how well you rotate, where you're going to, what the next zone is, how you are setting up for the next play. It is not your mechanics and how well you can aim, but your macro is actually how well you can set up plays to try and rotate to another zone, get out of a bad situation, move somewhere else, or just really set up a good game in general. So your macro could be your main issue. Your team could have amazing mechanics and you guys could 3v3 any trio out there, but when it comes to taking these fights, you guys just seem to always get third parties and you die. Now this is due to bad macro, obviously, and basically how you can fix this is in a multitude of ways. The first one being a simple play safer. Now I know basically every single person would tell you that, but there is some more logic to it than just playing safer. Instead of trying to look for kills whenever you see a kill, look for kills only when you know you're not in a position to get third-partied. Now, let me break that down a little bit more. Say your drop spot is Craggy Cliffs, and you just dropped there, you're starting off the game there, and there is only one other team there. You start to take a fight with them, but unfortunately, you start to get shot at in third-party. Even though you only thought there was one team there, it seems that another team has rotated in up from Pleasant Park. Now, the thing that you didn't pay attention to here is that the zone was actually on top of you. And I know that none of you guys listening actually have a visual for that, but just imagine that the zone is pulled up to Craggy Cliffs. If you try and take a fight where you only think that there's one other team there, that can be extremely risky because Craggy Cliffs is a really good spot to rotate into from either Pleasant Park, which I know Doom's domain, but I'm probably going to refer to it as Pleasant just because that's what it is in my mind. Or they could even rotate up from the bridge, or there's a bunch of other spots that you can land at that aren't named, such as the Orchard. It's right next to Craggy. People can rotate in there and look for third parties on teams like you that are playing a little bit too aggressive. Now let's say that same situation happens, except the zone is not right on top of you. This time you'd want to actually take that fight because the odds of you getting third partied are still there, but they're much lower as other teams still need to rotate out and everybody needs to get to that next zone. So taking the fight if you know your mechanics are good is probably a good decision there because it could net you some good points. Now, of course, macro isn't only about your early game, it's also your late game. Trying to figure out when you can rotate, when you should do all of that stuff. There are a multitude of videos out there that actually explain all the different layers in the late game. There's a bunch of competitive analysis on the late game, so I'm not going to dive too much into it, but basically, for your macro in the late game, just know that you want to make smart rotates. And by that, I mean, don't make any really exposed rotates. If your team has rotational items like shockwave grenades, bouncers, crash pads, or if your team is fully stacked on mats, never be rotating out in the open. Always have your sides covered, always have your top covered, because it's a complete waste if you manage to die while you still have 500 of one material. Think about it this way, if you die and you still have 6 shockwave grenades, you have completely wasted that game, as your entire time getting loot in the early game has been wasted now, as you didn't even use them to get out of a bad situation in the late game. That's why it's usually better to be proactive in the late game than reactive. Basically what this means is if you see a far zone, it's fine to use those shockwave grenades, because you don't want to wait until you've been hit for 150 damage, you're on 50 HP, and you got two teams pushing you to use those shockwave grenades, as you would rather just get to the next zone full and going in nice and strong. Now, I know I skipped over the mid game. I'm going to go back to it now. It's a difficult time of game for macro. Mid game is probably the most difficult spot to play through, to be totally honest. In the mid game, just play safe. I don't care how good your trio's mechanics are. I have analyzed so many different competitive games throughout every single season in Fortnite. The meta has always been to play conservative in this mid game. Now, that being said, you will see pro teams running around getting tons of kills, but their mechanics are literally far above anybody else who plays this game. Benji, Fishy, and Mongrel, their mechanics are just on another tier. They're literally built different. And I don't want to sound mean here, but if you didn't manage to qualify to semis in the first week, then you're definitely not having those good of mechanics, so you definitely shouldn't be trying to take many fights in the mid game. Mid game is the time where you want to be looking to get full materials for your entire team, getting a little bit better loot if you can find any, maybe scavenge some, but you're not going to want to take many fights. Try and make safe rotates when you can. Try and stay away from other teams, as fights in the mid game are typically third partied, and everything just falls apart very quickly in the mid game if you take a bad fight. So that's basically my analysis for your macro. Basically, for your early game, you're going to want to look for early fights if the zone is not on you, if you think that you can beat the other team. Now, if the zone is on you, taking a fight is a little bit riskier, as other people can rotate onto you, especially if you're on a major named location, such as Craggy Cliffs. That's just the one example I'm using, but there's other spots like literally every other named location. Taking fights while you're in zone is still very risky. It is also a smart play in some instances, but those are very specific and farther spread out between games, so I would just recommend typically don't take fights when you're in the zone unless you know you can easily kill them very quickly before a third party comes along. For the mid game, you'll just want to play it safe. Honestly, I've sometimes said play it aggressive if you have really good mechanics, but let's be legit here. If you're not qualifying for the semifinals, like I said, your mechanics are not that pro level, so you definitely should not be taking fights in the mid game. Try and play that safer, try and play it more conservatively, and don't get yourself into bad situations. In the late game, you'll want to make smart rotates. Try and take the empty side of the zone. By that, I mean try and take the side of the zone where nobody is. I know that can be very difficult at times, as people will be spaced out, but always try and find the least contested path of rotation. And also, if your team is stacked on materials and rotational items, use them proactively and not reactively. So that basically covers macro for FNCS. Now, if you didn't qualify for the semifinals, those are all of my macro tips I have for you. What you can do to improve your trio's mindset, and that brings me right into my next point of your mindset. As I see it, Fortnite is probably 70% mindset, 20% macro, and honestly 25% macro, 5% mechanics. You could have horrible mechanics and still qualify for semifinals of FNCS just because you make amazing smart plays, and even if you make bad plays, you are able to untilt yourself and get right into the next game without raging and doing anything stupid. That's why I say 70% of this game is your mindset. If your trio has a really negative mindset, you guys are going to get nowhere. You are just going to argue with each other and get mad and just keep continuing to die. Now, if your trio actually gets along and keeps a positive mindset, resetting every game and making sure that all of you guys are on the same page, that you're all super chill, you will get way farther. I can promise you that. You will do better. So basically, always remember, just keep your mindset in check. Never get too big of an ego. Remember, it's just a game at the end of the day. Don't get so mad over it. You just need to relax, chill out, and you can do this. Now, this brings me to my final point of micro or mechanics, how well you are in those 3v3 situations. Now, this really depends majorly for every single team. Every single person's mechanics is going to be different than the next person's, and this is really all decided based on how much you practice. There's tons of different practicing videos in Fortnite, so I'm not going to cover all of them right now, but definitely you want to practice your aiming, edits, building, literally every single part. That's your micro, how well you can do in these fights. Now, your macro is sometimes decided by your micro, and that is typically true. If you're a pro player and you're W keying all these fights, you're only doing it because you know you have those great mechanics. Now, if you didn't qualify for semifinals, though, either your team has horrible macro, horrible micro, or you guys are just average at both of them, and either three of those are completely fine. I have that as well when I play solos. My micro sucks, my macro is pretty good, and then my mindset is, I think, really good when I play this game, just because it's a game at the end of the day. You just gotta reset your mindset. Now, how can you improve your micro? You'll definitely want to do creative training maps, things like aim trainers, edit trainers, Raider 464 maps, any building maps, literally just hopping into a creative and just doing some free builds for a while, building whatever you want, just working on some cool new tricks you found from your favorite streamers, or just doing whatever you want. Playing the game is the best way to improve your micro. So those are my tips on how you can qualify for semifinals in the coming weeks in FNCS with your trio. If you guys found this helpful, please consider leaving a like on it and subscribing to the channel, as that would help me out a ton. Remember, go subscribe to all of my golden gummies. Their channels will be linked in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have an amazing day, and I will see you in the next one.